The Fairy Hunters. One-line summary. The fairy hunters look for the last Earth fairy, and it's not Bloom. Thoughts. I like the next generation feel, where the old students are now new teachers to the new students. Favorite scene was this reference, as well as later, when this episode's antagonist was redeemed. Ranking. Since Flora is my favorite Winx, I didn't like this episode much, but I did like how Bloom isn't the focus for the villains. The Tree of Life. One-line summary. The couples reunite and the girls fight the nightmare of pixies. Thoughts. Except for cute love stuff, I wasn't into the monster fighting since it took away from my rewatchability. Ranking. Story-wise, I did like how Faragonda got the guys to follow the girls as they look for the last Earth fairy. The last Earth fairy. One-line summary. The Winx start a new Love and Pets store, and there's a new girl. Thoughts. I love the whole story of how Dad gets 5 new teenage daughters and how they mess things up, and how the girls try to live like regular humans, but they constantly fail until they start their own business. But Flora, being able to literally create life like that, it was too much for me, and I wasn't expecting it. Lots of little moments I liked, the human interactions, and the new girl, a 7th Winx, possibly, or a new enemy. Ranking. Might not be the most moving episode, but I liked all the fun and the fairies trying to be like normal girls. Love and Pet. One-line summary. The guys arrive on Earth and there's relationship strain. Also, Roxy is like Bloom. Thoughts. As how Bloom dreamed of Daphne, Roxy dreams about this woman. Also, Roxy has magical powers. Overall, except for R2, I'm not much into the pets and animals, since it feels like an advertisement. Ranking. In addition to Roxy's last Earth fairy focus, it seems that relationship strain is also a major theme this season. Mitzi's present. One-line summary. The fairy hunters turn pets into monsters, and Mitzi likes Brandon. Thoughts. I love out-of-place magic uses on Earth. It reminds me of Star Trek characters using today's technology. I love the line of, "He's an animal, not a toy." It's true. There's a huge difference between stuffed animals and a pet. Ranking. Couldn't help but think of You're Not You When You're Hungry when it came to the pet monsters. A Fairy in Danger. One-line summary. Roxy, the last Earth fairy, is found by the Winx, and also by the bad guys. Thoughts. For a while, it's been Roxy who was adopting pets, and I always like seeing her dog R2. When they're endangered by the fairy hunters, the Winx get her to believe in fairies, and believe powers begin. Ranking. I like how Roxy's good with animals, and also how she's helped the Winx gain more powers. Winx Believix. One-line summary. A battle between good and bad, and all whom I cared for was R2. Thoughts. Due to one of the fairy hunter's powers, I was always paranoid if I was really seeing who I was seeing. The boys are now working for Roxy's dad, and I really loved her cute embarrassment at his protection. Speaking of cute, I liked how all the girls are getting along. Bloom could totally empathize with Roxy. Ranking. Repeating myself, it's almost as if Bloom's story is told through Roxy, but to me it still feels new. The White Circle. One-line summary. The girls save a grumpy man's farm, and he starts believing in fairies. Thoughts. I loved how the girls helped the man out, despite how he was mean earlier. Here's Flora. After this, there's more boy trouble, but rather than talking about that, here's their Western outfits. Ranking. Roxy and Flora featured a lot here since there was an environmental theme with animals and plants. Nebula. One-line summary. Roxy gets possessed by Nebula through the circle and fights off fairy hunters. Thoughts. I really enjoyed how intense and dark this episode was, with a vengeful body-possessing witch. I particularly loved how she was very powerful, fighting off anyone getting in her way, good or bad characters. Ranking. I think it's above average because of those mentioned darker elements that raise the stakes. Musa's Song. One-line summary. After the Winx save people from a fire, people start believing in fairies. Thoughts. Firstly, as you should tell by now, I have skipped over relationship troubles in favor for Winx Club stories. Lots of moments I liked in this one, particularly Aisha saving the little girl. I loved it, and of course, I loved Bloom saving her dad. I was kind of wondering, if she's a fire fairy, couldn't she stop the fire? Ranking. We begin with some humorous failures of believing in fairies, but it ends with heartwarming wins. Winx Club S4. One-line summary. The girls try to be superheroines to get people to believe in them. Thoughts. To begin, isn't this a cute picture? Of course it is. Seriously, almost nothing new in this episode. The Musa Riven and Stella Brandon problems continue, but Aisha and Naboo become permanent. Also, this dog is talking. For a while I've been suspicious of him. Is he really a dog, or is he magical? Ranking. Unlike previous seasons, the Winx don't hide. Rather, they show off their powers to humans. Dad, I'm a fairy. One-line summary. In this episode, Roxy skips fairy levels and becomes a Believix. Thoughts. A pet-centered episode with animals talking, working together to find Roxy, and lots of art too. Well-placed twists with this scene, but makes me paranoid into thinking that no one is whom they seem. I loved how the "just a dog" comment caused Roxy to transform, but I wonder why Bloom didn't cure him. Ranking. Pets, twists, time travel wings, and Roxy as a Believix. There was a lot to like in this episode. The Wizards Attack. One-line summary. Basically a long fight scene with lots of fun action moments. Thoughts. I particularly liked the cute moments, and it was fun to see the couples fight as a team. This woman appears again and encourages Roxy, but unfortunately it's again Bloom who saves the day. Ranking. I wonder how similar that woman is to Roxy. Would it be like Bloom's sister, or maybe it's her mom? The Perfect Number. One-line summary. Basically an animal rescue episode with a cheesy solution. Thoughts. Bloom comforts a hesitant Roxy, but in contrast, Bloom wanted to be a fairy once she had magic. So, despite how Roxy brings up good points, it's unfair to her to defend herself against not being Bloom. Ranking. The main story wasn't too interesting to me, but I did like how the Winx managed being celebrities. Magic Lessons. One-line summary. The Winx battle a kind of tricks trio trained by the Black Circle. Thoughts. I really liked what was going on in this episode, except I wish it was longer and more developed. As how Valtor gave power to the Tricks, the same happens to these girls, and they undermine the Winx. I really love such parallels, and I also like how the competing girl teams battle for the people's support. The villainous tactics were unusually sadistic and terroristic. Mitzi says, "Hit the crowd, it's their weakness." Maybe that's referencing how the Believix powers work, but I took it as victimizing those whom the Winx care about. Either way, I liked how the Winx saved everyone in the end, and I'll end this review with the cute kids. Ranking. Stars for personal loves. Honestly, I would have loved to see this conflict be covered over an entire season. A Virtual World. One-line summary. The girls hide themselves and a key in a game, and the guys help them. Thoughts. I thought the whole idea was cool. It honestly reminded me of the holodeck from Star Trek. Another thing I liked was, oddly, the romantic stuff, because it was funny how Riven always fails despite meaning well. It was also funny that despite the couples and relationship issues this season, Roxy has no problems because she has R2. Ranking. Brackets because I just love the idea, and I just really enjoyed watching this episode. The Enchanted Island. One-line summary. In the end, the Winx free the fairies who want vengeance. Thoughts. Interesting to see temptations, particularly Stella's, but that's not what made this episode. What made this episode was the very ending. The fairies don't want to forgive nor forget, and they want vengeance. It wasn't really a twist, since we have already seen Nebula taking over Roxy, which even has a flashback. The fairies see all as enemies, the wizards, the humans who don't believe in them, and also the Winx. It's quite a change from what Roxy would have expected, but Winx Club has always had dark elements. Although this is an excuse to have these cute kids, we have seen, for example, kids being endangered. And the way to get Enchantix powers involves sacrifice, so I wasn't really surprised of vengeful fairies. What I suppose happened was that after all those years, Nebula's hate infected everyone else. Ranking. My all-time top episode changed the whole tone of the show for me. The last minutes of this episode further solidified that. The Nature Rage. The one-line summary is basically the title. Diana, the nature fairy, is full of rage. Thoughts. Wow, is Diana powerful. Flo is nothing compared to her. And Diana attacks everyone. She fails to get to Roxy to join her side, and so she lets nature run wild. Later, the Winx try to undo the damage. Diana has tons of great scenes, and I really like how she is so frankly overpowered. I wonder how good will win. Ranking. One of my favorite things to see is bad characters make such conflicts that victory seems impossible. In Diana's Kingdom. One-line summary. The girls gain Sophics powers, and they journey to save a forest. Thoughts. With all the environmentalism, it feels like a Flora episode, even if she's not always the focus. There are warrior fairies who guard nature, and we also see Diana, who has captured our heroes and heroines. About Sophics, I love the scene. We have close-ups of their beautiful faces, but Muses has obstructions. The music is upbeat, sparkly, and magical. The vocals are light, strong, and angelic, and it's all around ethereal. Flora has always been my favorite, and with Sophics, the flowers, the leaves, and the petals all suit her. Odd moment, but maybe Stella has learned from Roxy's animal skills, and so she's okay with snakes. Ranking. Apart from the Sophics scene, I wasn't much into the story, though I do like saving forests. The Gifts of Destiny. One-line summary. The Winx battle loggers who hurt the forest, and therefore Diana. Thoughts. Diana's insanely powerful, but she can be weakened whenever nature is attacked. I really love the teamwork between the Winx and the previous enemies after the loggers attacked. As mentioned in the last review, this totally feels like a Flora episode, despite not only being about her. Ranking. I really like the changing of the sides and how, through love and forgiveness, enemies can become allies. Sibylla's Cave. One-line summary. The bad guys apparently surrender, so the Winx look for a Justice Fairy. Thoughts. Maybe I'm cynical, but I just don't believe anything from these bad guys, and it took me out of the story. Also, with the Justice Fairy, personally, wouldn't it be more interesting if she was corrupt or draconian? Unfortunately, the only thing I found interesting was the rustic fairies and how they were cute and odd. Ranking. Sorry, but I can't help but remember all the times the Winx were too trusting, not to mention all the recent revenge themes. The Frozen Tower. One-line summary. The North Fairy threatens to freeze everyone, but is told to spare Roxy. Thoughts. Regarding story, since Roxy is always protected, any danger she's in doesn't feel real to me. Also, as expected, the bad guys were still bad guys. Anyways, here's pretty winter outfits. The real star is Aurora, who is like Icy but more powerful, and probably not completely cold-hearted. And, compared to Disney's Elsa, well, Aurora can freeze an entire planet, not just a town, and it's at will, not just accidentally. I'll end with pictures of Aurora, Flora looking cute, and the pretty but pretty impractical outfits of the Arctic fairies. Ranking. Overall, despite the sadism, I like how the mage fairies basically hold humans hostage to get their way. Bloom's trial. One-line summary. Bloom defeats Nebula in a fight, and so Morgana stops her revenge. Thoughts. Everything I have to say revolves around Nebula, who is pretty much blind with vengeance. Not only does she question Morgana, making Aurora reprimand her, but she suggests destroying Sibylla's cave. To harm an ally, especially a fellow major fairy, makes Nebula one of the most hateful fairies so far. During the fight, Nebula starts using pieces of Aurora's ice tower as weapons, to which Aurora objects. And she uses them not only against Bloom, but also against Gardenia, hoping an iceberg will kill thousands. Even after Bloom stops the iceberg, defeating Nebula, she still fights, until Aurora freezes her. Personally, I'm not sure why she lost, since she'd probably fight to the death, but that's probably too much for this show. The fight dialogue was good because it reminded me of hypocritical Bloom's revenge after losing Tecna. By the way, about the death, there's a gift that could revive one. It's a hard choice if between an ally or a foe, and it's even harder if between two allies. I'll end with Aurora because during the battle, I loved seeing her reactions of annoyance to Nebula. Ranking. Truthfully, I'll probably never change my top episode since it's changed the entire show for me, but this would have come close. The Day of Justice. One-line summary. The expected betrayal happens. All is not lost, but Naboo dies. Thoughts. It's ironic that the most useful guy, of the least dramatic couple, it's Naboo who dies. About death. Tecna was supposedly lost, Daphne's dead but still communicates, and Bloom's parents were saved. So could Naboo be this? Maybe not, since then Nebula blaming Morgana for Naboo's death would be lessened. And Aisha's turn from good to needing revenge and her conflict with the Winx would be lessened as well. About revenge. Generally, the Winx are against it until they're victimized. So are they hypocrites? Probably, and I'm sure Bloom would be bloodthirsty if what happened to Naboo were to happen to Sky. Before I end, some random notes. I'm pretty sure Morgana is Roxy's mother, or at least a close relative. And there was a comment on how the fairy's wings were removed. To me, that's torture like removing limbs. Ranking. So to rank this episode, I rewatched my top 1 to see how it compared. And as a standalone episode, the predictability of the portrayal, the previous return of lost characters, and how it was the end that was strong, makes this episode my second. But I think this show's darkest moment was the wasting of that much-needed gift of life. Morgana's secret. One-line summary. Aisha is trained by Nebula, and she fights the Winx and Morgana. Thoughts. To me, this episode was all Aisha, beginning with her practicing, trained by Nebula. When the Winx arrive, she attacks her friends. It took them, and me, by surprise, because I never thought I'd see that. The whole thing was a coup, staged by Nebula, and she imprisoned Morgana in a mirror. There's a fight, and it's so interesting to see a protagonist on the antagonistic but sympathetic side. She's got heartbreaking lines about being replaced, avenging Naboo's death, and being broken like Oberon's flower. We get different combinations of fairies, Winx and wizards all fighting, and characters switching sides. We get shots like this, Bloom's last grip on Aisha before she loses her and Aisha chases the wizards. My last slide will be the obvious to anyone but necessary mention that Morgana is Roxy's mother. Ranking. It's very high because we built from the previous amazing episode and we see such character conflict. Ice and Fire. One-line summary. Wizards are defeated, Aisha gives up on revenge and rejoins the Winx, and Morgana returns. Thoughts. It is so anticlimactic. 1. The wizards are defeated by being frozen in ice very early on. 2. There's a cave-in. Nebula repents and contemplates suicide, but Bloom easily changes her mind. 3. Morgana makes Nebula queen. Knowing Nebula's hysterical vengeance, this is insane. So all the important aspects of the finale were complete fails. However, getting past that, I really like it. Now fans who make comments on consistency point out the obvious plot holes about Roxy and age. Unfortunately, even if I kept track or had thought about it, I'm too busy loving cute baby Roxy and puppy R2. Ranking. I'm sorry, but with so much build-up from such strong episodes previously, this was so bad that even cute flashbacks can't save it. And that's my review of Season 4 of the Winx Club. I seem to love the ending arc once the major fairies appeared. Due to this, I was super harsh if I felt disappointed and underwhelmed. Now, as usual, I'll take the top, the bottom, and the middle episodes for my relative review rankings for next season. Winx Club is directed, created, and produced by Ingenio Straffi and his company Rainbow SRL, in co-production with Rye Fiction.